Hi, I'm Christy. I'm here today with Ray Howell. He is the co-owner and operations manager for FreshCo. We're going to visit with Ray today and get a little bit more information on what goes into a mold removal job. So Ray, set the scene for us. What did you find when you got to your recent mold removal job?
So this one was a little bit different. It First off, it wasn't a residential one. It was what we call a commercial job. That means the general public has access to the facility while we're doing the work. And so there was, in this particular setting, there was a heightened need for us to ensure that no contamination got outside of our containment. Of course, even during a residential job, that's always our number one risk factor is anything leaving the contained area. But even more on this one because of others' health and just the kind of facility that it was, we had to be extra cautious about what we did, how we did it, and how we communicated with the facility, how we communicated with their clients, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say was one of the biggest challenges you found in the job, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges was working around other maintenance construction staff that were in the facility, as well as clients coming in and out of the facility. So that in particular was the biggest obstacle because you can't control other people. They can do even if no matter what you do, there's still a chance that they just ignore things and just do whatever they want.
Right.
So
because they've got a job to do as well.
Yes.
Time, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what steps in the mold removal process could you explain to us that you took? That way you didn't spread the mold spores into other areas of the property.
Yeah, so on every job, the EPA says for certain sizes of jobs, they kind of have their checklist. And even for a small job, the EPA states that you don't need to have any containment, you don't need to have any negative air, you just need basic PPE, and you're going to be okay. Well, our company procedures are not that way. We will do containment, negative air, PPE every time. You might say, well, isn't that being a little extreme? Mm-hmm. Well, it's not only for the residents, the people that are there. It's not only for their safety, but it's also for our people's safety. Because if our staff gets in the habit of cutting corners, not putting containment up, not wearing a respirator, things like that, then there could be at times where they're at greater risk because they're out of that practice. So to ensure the safety of our clients and our staff, we just blanket it. There's always containment, always negative air, always PPE. But for this one, since there was a heightened risk of contractors and other people that would have a variance on our containment, we went above and beyond on our containment and the safety measures that we take to maintain negative pressure. So we had multiple layers, if you will, of containment. So if somebody or something got past one, they weren't in the contaminated area because there was still another barrier. The same thing with our negative air or our air filtration devices. We normally have a backup, but on this one we had a backup for backup, so that if one went down, the other one would come on, and if that secondary one went down, a third one would come on. So again, just another aspect that we had to think about. We had to ensure that we had that in place so that if that were to happen, we still could maintain a zero exposure rate.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned a little bit about the equipment and materials. Uh-huh. So how do you know what to use when you're going into a job?
Yeah, so Containment is generally made up of 6 or 4 mil plastic. Um, Depending on the severity of the job, we may have multiple chambers that our employees have to go through, and this just ensures that nothing gets past those chambers, that all the contaminant stays in there if things happen. And so the general procedure is for microbial growth, which this was the case with that, is since we talked about the multiple layers. So I don't mean just stacking 3 layers of plastic on top of each other, okay? Um, so we blocked off doors that led to the main area that housed the 3 chambers that were before you get into the contaminated area. So there were signs, there were barriers up that warned people and kind of discouraged them from entering that area before they even get into the contaminated room. So if they went in that room, there was no contamination still, even though they were warned. Then they still had to go through these chambers. So these chambers worked two different ways. To discourage people from entering the contaminated area, but also that if something were to go wrong with our protocols, that nothing would leave those 3 chambers. So what we would do is we'd remove the contaminated materials, we would put them in a bag, we would seal that bag, then we would wipe that bag down, we would set it in a chamber, then that bag would get wiped down again. Then it would be set in the next chamber, and so on and so forth till it got out, so that we ensured a zero exposure rate, and that was really not every mold job warrants that amount of care, but some of them do, and so it was all about weighing the risk to not only for insurance reasons but health risks. It's how serious our client took their client's safety, and so we were able to come up with extra protocols to ensure them that there could be a zero exposure rate. So
you've mentioned a little bit about maybe some difficulties that you encountered after you got in there. How did you overcome some of those?
Yeah, and so and I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but one of the difficulties that we came into was we were working in a certain area of this commercial building, and we could not turn off the HVAC system. So one of our protocols is the HVAC system gets shut off. We couldn't do that, so we had to figure out a way. Okay, how do we keep this HVAC system from positively charging our containment area so that it doesn't push mold out of our containment area? So we mentioned the air filtration devices that we had 3 of, kind of a backup to a backup. Well, normally to size those is very simple. You get the cubic feet. You make sure that you have 4 air exchanges per hour on the machine that you put in there. So anyway, but we had to account for that HVAC unit coming on. So first we blocked the HVAC unit. When we med block, we put a foam block in there, and then we did our best to contain it. But once that thing comes on, air is going to come through. It's going to find a way. It's going to come through. So what we had to ensure was that we had enough air. We were taking enough air out that if that unit came on, that it would take that positive air and wouldn't create any positive air in that chamber. So that was different and a little more difficult. And another thing that we had to do was, because of the containment was so extensive in this case, that we had to have somebody monitor the adhesives and things like that, because the humidity would spike enough that the adhesives would start to delaminate. And so we had somebody there monitoring it while the work was going on, ensuring that containment stayed up, because we had to have extra negative pressure there to make sure that when that thing kicked on, we didn't get that positive pressure. So a couple different things that, knowing the situation, knowing the ins and outs, definitely gave us an advantage of making sure that didn't surprise us. So.
And finally, Ray, just to kind of sum up everything, what would you share with us about FreshCo and mold remediation?
Yeah, so one thing that we get asked a lot about, and all these guys, is we always get asked how dangerous it is, and like I was mentioning in the EPA, it says that there's a certain amount you only have to do this. Well, we're not doctors, and we don't know what type of mold it is,
Right.
and we don't know how you're going to react to it. And so, really, we what we'd like to relay is, we treat all mold the same. We treat it as it's dangerous, and really you should too. We're not saying that you need to call somebody if you find just a little bit of it, but uh, call a professional, ask them for their advice, ask them, if this is reasonable for me to do yourself. The other thing is this particular client of ours that found themselves in this situation. This happened because of a water loss that they had kind of handled themselves.
Mm.
And so I'd also say that even if you are handling a water loss yourself, because we understand, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to suck up water with a shot vac and put a fan on it. But we do have special tools, and we do know where to look because we handle the water jobs so often. And we can look in places that you might not have thought of, that water might have got, have tools to tell if it's really dry. And so even if you're handling the water loss yourself, call a professional, have them make sure that you got it all, that it is really dry, so that you don't end up in this situation later on, having to deal with this mold growth, and now it's this big thing, and it's interrupting your life, and
Dangerous.
yeah, and it can be dangerous. And some of us are very susceptible to mold and mold spores. And yeah, it can be dangerous.
Well, we wanted to thank you so much, Ray, for this interview. It was very informative. We've learned safety techniques and things that we can do and things that we shouldn't do. So we just want to thank you so much for your expertise and all your knowledge on this. So we want to thank you all again for enjoying this video, and we will post a link below for FreshCo, and see y'all next time.